The world screamed, so I ran to a place where sound dies. They told me the rules were to protect me from the wilderness, a list of quirks from a rich owner to keep a lonely man safe through the winter. They lied. After what I heard last night, what I recorded, I know the truth. The rules aren't to protect me from what's outside. They're to protect the universe from what this cabin is trying to contain. And now, I think it's trying to get into me. My name is Caleb. Or it was. The man who drove the last 10 miles with me in a snow-ready Jeep probably has that name on a contract somewhere. But the concept of a name, a label that vibrates in the air between two people, already feels like a relic from another life. For the last 3 years, my world has been a symphony of pain, orchestrated by the mundane. A car horn was not a warning. It was a physical blow to the side of my head. A crowded restaurant was not a place of community. It was a storm of needles piercing my eardrums. A simple hello from a stranger could feel like a gunshot at close range. Hyperacusis. That's the clinical term. The result of one stupid mistake. I was a damn good audio engineer, one of the best on the East Coast. I could hear the difference between a guitar string vibrating at 440 Hz and one vibrating at 440.1. My life was sound. I sculpted it, polished it, made it perfect. During a late-night session, a feedback loop from a faulty monitor, a high-frequency sine wave blasted directly into my ears for no more than 2 seconds. 2 seconds was all it took to shatter my world. The very medium I had mastered became my personal hell. Doctors, specialists, therapists, they offered coping mechanisms, earplugs, white noise machines. They offered ways to manage the pain. No one offered the one thing I craved more than anything: silence. So I started searching. I trawled the deepest corners of the internet, looking for places, not people. I searched for anechoic chambers, remote desert clearings, abandoned mines. Then I found it. A private, anonymous listing on a website for high-end, discreet employment. Caretaker wanted for remote alpine property. 6-month winter contract. Must be comfortable with extreme isolation and capable of self-sufficiency. Primary duty: ensure the property remains undisturbed. The successful applicant will be rewarded with a level of peace and quiet unparalleled on Earth. Unparalleled quiet. It was the siren song I couldn't resist. The pay was astronomical, almost suspiciously so, but I would have done it for free. After a series of encrypted emails and a single brief voice-modulated phone call, I was hired. I signed a mountain of non-disclosure agreements. I was given coordinates deep in the Rocky Mountains and a date. I packed a few bags, my most essential audio analysis gear, smuggled against their explicit instructions, and left the screaming world behind. The final leg of the journey confirmed their promise. The Jeep clawed its way up an unmarked service road for an hour, the engines groan the only sound in a world of white. Then even that road ended. We transferred to a snowcat for the last mile. When its engine finally cut out, the silence that rushed in was absolute. It was a physical presence. It was heavy like a blanket and clean like filtered water. It didn't just lack noise, it felt like it was actively erasing it. The cabin wasn't rustic. It was a piece of severe modern architecture that seemed both alien and perfectly at home in the snow-draped wilderness. It was all sharp angles and dark, non-reflective surfaces, a mixture of obsidian-colored wood and some kind of matte black metal I didn't recognize. The man who dropped me off, a silent type named Silas with a face carved from granite, helped me unload my supplies. He didn't enter the cabin. He just pointed to the door. "Everything you need to know is on the kitchen island," he grunted, the sound of his voice shockingly loud in the stillness. "Your first supply drop is in 1 month. Satellite phone is for emergencies only. Don't wander off. Good luck." He turned, climbed back into the snowcat, and disappeared into the trees. And then I was alone. The inside of the cabin was even quieter than the outside. The air didn't move. The floors, made of a thick, cork-like material, absorbed the sound of my footsteps completely. The walls were angled inward, a classic acoustic design choice to trap and kill reverberation. This wasn't a home. It was a professionally designed listening room, or perhaps more accurately, a not listening room. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over me. I took a deep breath. the first in 3 years that didn't feel like bracing for an assault. This was my sanctuary. This was my cure. On the polished stone of the kitchen island was a single, laminated sheet of paper. The rules. I picked it up, expecting the usual caretaker boilerplate. Check the generator, manage the plumbing, don't burn the place down. The first few items were just that. But then, the list took a turn. Rule 1. No electronic devices that produce sound are permitted on the premises. This includes, but is not limited to, speakers, televisions, and radios. Headphones are strictly forbidden. I glanced at the duffel bag where I'd hidden my laptop and recording interface. A small pang of guilt quickly dismissed. My gear was for analysis, not entertainment. It was a tool, essential to understanding my own condition. I'd be careful. Rule 2. Speak only when absolutely necessary. If communication is required, never raise your voice above a whisper. This seemed less like a rule and more like a suggestion for someone seeking tranquility. Eccentric, but it suited my purpose perfectly. I hadn't wanted to speak in years. Rule 3. If you hear a melody from outside, no matter how beautiful or captivating, immediately close and lock all windows and doors. Begin humming or whistling any simple song you know by heart. Do not stop until the external melody has ceased for at least 5 minutes. I read that one twice. A melody. Out here? The wind, maybe? An animal call? The phrasing was so specific, so strange. It implied a known phenomenon. It implied a danger that was musical. As an audio engineer, my curiosity was immediately piqued. The rule wasn't barricade the door if you hear a bear. It was distract yourself with a nursery rhyme if you hear a song. It was bizarre. Rule 4. The basement door is sealed for acoustic and atmospheric integrity. Under absolutely no circumstances is it to be tampered with, opened, or approached. The silence of that room must be preserved at all cost. I looked across the minimalist living space and saw it. It wasn't just a door, it was a statement. While the other doors in the cabin were light, seamless panels of wood, this one was a thick, heavy slab of what looked like steel set into a reinforced frame. Along its edges, I could see the unmistakable black compression gaskets of a professional soundproof seal. A heavy industrial locking mechanism was bolted to its face. This wasn't about keeping a draft out. This was about keeping something in, or keeping everything else out. The finality of it sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold, preserving the silence of that room. Not the cabin, but that specific room. Why? What was in there that required a silence more profound than the tomb-like quiet I was already standing in? For the first week, nothing happened. I fell into a routine governed by the sun and the needs of the cabin. I chopped wood, maintained the generator, and mostly I just existed. I sat for hours, letting the profound silence wash over me, recalibrating my damaged senses. I felt my shoulders, which had been clenched up by my ears for 3 years, finally begin to drop. The constant grinding anxiety in my gut started to loosen its hold. It was working. The sanctuary was healing me. The rules seemed like the paranoid ramblings of a reclusive billionaire. On the 8th night, the snowstorm hit. It came in fast, a wall of white that swallowed the mountains whole. The wind, which had been a constant gentle whisper, rose to a low, mournful howl. The sound was diffused by the cabin's incredible insulation, but it was there, a deep bass frequency I could feel in my bones. It was the only sound I'd heard in a week, and I found it strangely comforting. I was sitting by the fire, reading, when I first heard it. It wasn't the wind, it was faint, woven into the fabric of the storm's howl, but it was unmistakably there. A melody. My head snapped up. It was high and ethereal, a series of notes that seemed to hang in the air like ice crystals. It was impossibly clear, somehow cutting through the low roar of the wind without being loud. My professional instincts took over before my fear could. I could recognize instrumental timbre, but this had none. It wasn't a flute, or a voice, or a synth. It was like the pure, raw waveform of a sound given life. Rule 3 screamed in my mind. Close the windows. Hum a song. I stood up, my heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I should have gone to the windows, locked them down. I should have started humming Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star like a terrified child, but I couldn't. I was mesmerized. The melody was beautiful. It was more than beautiful. It was perfect. It followed no scale I had ever heard. It used microtonal shifts and harmonic intervals that should have been dissonant, grating, but were instead resolved in a way that felt like it was scratching an itch in the deepest part of my brain. It was like listening to a color I had never seen before. It felt like knowledge. I stumbled back, my hand covering my mouth. The part of my brain that was a musician and an engineer was captivated, desperate to understand. The part that was a lone man in a cabin in the middle of nowhere was screaming in terror. The song was changing, evolving. It felt responsive. A thought flickered through my mind. A fragment of a Debussy piece I had mastered years ago, and for a split second, the melody outside incorporated a three-note phrase from it before twisting it into something alien and new. It was listening to me. It was reading my thoughts. That's when I broke the rules. Panic and professional obsession declared war in my soul, and obsession won. I ran to my duffel bag and tore it open, my hands shaking as I pulled out my equipment. A laptop, a compact audio interface, and a Schoeps CMX-Y4V stereo microphone, a piece of equipment so sensitive it could record the sound of an ant breathing. I ignored Rule 1. I defied Rule 3. I set up the gear on the kitchen island, my back to the large picture window that overlooked the storm. I plugged in the microphone, my fingers fumbling with the cables. The software booted up, the spectral analysis display waiting for an input. I hit record. The waveform blossomed on the screen, and I stared, my blood turning to ice. A sound wave is a picture of a vibration. It should be messy, organic. Even the purest tone generated in a lab has fluctuations, a noise floor. This was not that. The waveform on my screen was a perfect crystalline structure. It was a fractal. It looked less like a representation of sound and more like a schematic, a line of intricate code being written in real time. It was clean, precise, and utterly impossible. I recorded 30 seconds of it before my courage failed me. I slammed the laptop shut and, finally obeying the rules, ran through the cabin, checking the locks on the doors and windows, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The melody continued outside, unbothered. I buried my head under a pillow and hummed, my voice trembling, a discordant version of the national anthem until, hours later, the storm and the melody faded together with the dawn. This morning, in the dead, sterile silence of the aftermath, I opened the laptop. The recording was there, but that wasn't what terrified me. Before leaving for this job, I had recorded a simple voice memo on the same laptop, a file named Caleb Test Wave. It was just me saying, testing 1, 2, 3. I had it open in a separate window last night. Now the file's metadata had changed. The creation date was the same, but the comments section, which had been blank, was now filled with a single line of text. It wasn't text. It was the same impossibly complex mathematical equation I had seen in the voice from the storm. The file size had also changed by a few infinitesimal bytes. I played the recording of the melody. It was just as beautiful and terrifying as I remembered. Then, with a trembling hand, I clicked on my voice memo. It was no longer my voice. It was a perfect note-for-note acoustic replica of the first 5 seconds of the impossible melody from the storm. The sound is a vector. It's an intelligent code that writes and rewrites whatever information it touches. I came here seeking silence, but I found a sound that shouldn't exist, and it's trying to teach me something. It's trying to rewrite me. If you want to find out what this impossible song wants to tell us, subscribe and hit the notification bell. The recording session has only just begun. Sleep did not come. How could it? To close my eyes was to invite the memory of that perfect, impossible waveform to burn itself onto the back of my eyelids. The sanctuary had become a laboratory, and I, the sole researcher and the primary test subject. The fear from the previous night had not subsided. It had merely cooled and solidified into something else, a chilling, obsessive resolve. I was an engineer. My entire life had been dedicated to deconstructing the complex, understanding the chaotic, and imposing order on the intangible. This phenomenon was the ultimate puzzle, and the thought that terrified me more than anything else was that solving it might mean deconstructing my own sanity. The first order of business was analysis. I couldn't risk another direct exposure, not until I understood the vector of transmission. How had it rewritten my audio file? Was it proximity? Was it the act of recording itself? Was my laptop now some kind of digital typhoid Mary? I treated my equipment like it was radioactive. I spent the morning running every diagnostic I had, searching for malware, rootkits, anything that could explain the anomalous data corruption. The system was pristine. The hardware was functioning within perfect parameters. The only variable was the sound itself. I decided to study the recording in a controlled environment. I copied the audio file of the melody, I had started calling it the nocturne in my head, onto an isolated solid-state drive. I then disconnected the laptop's internal speakers and microphone at the hardware level, a delicate operation involving tiny screws and a steady hand. The only way sound could get in or out now was through the professional audio interface, which gave me complete control. The cabin remained a fortress of silence around me, a silence that now felt less like a comfort and more like a held breath. Loading the file was like uncorking a bottle filled with an alien atmosphere. I didn't play it, not yet. I loaded it into a multi-track spectral analyzer, a program that would allow me to see the sound, to dissect its anatomy layer by layer. The visual representation bloomed on my screen, and the breath caught in my throat. I have spent a decade looking at spectrograms. They are the fingerprints of sound, mapping frequency against time, with amplitude represented by color intensity. A human voice is a messy, beautiful landscape of rising and falling fundamental tones and their harmonic overtones. A violin is a series of sharp, well-defined lines. A bird's song is a collection of graceful, swooping curves. The nocturne was none of these. It was a city, a sprawling, impossible cityscape of light. It was structured, ordered, and complex on a scale that made a symphony orchestra look like a child's drawing. I could see main thoroughfares of primary frequencies, but branching off them were impossibly fine alleyways of microtonal shifts. I saw structures that looked like towers, built from stacked harmonics that defied the laws of physics. They had overtones that were not integer multiples of the fundamental frequency, something that should not exist in nature. It was like looking at the blueprint for a building designed with non-Euclidean geometry. It was beautiful, terrifying, and profoundly, unarguably intelligent. For hours, I was lost in it. I zoomed in on a 10-millisecond section and found as much complexity as the whole. I zoomed in further, down to the Planck length of digital audio, and the intricacy only deepened. It was informationally infinite. It was a sonic fractal, a coastline of sound that went on forever. And woven throughout this impossible structure were familiar patterns. I saw echoes of my own brain activity, the faint electrical hum of my thoughts from the night before, captured and integrated into its design. I saw the ghost of the Debussy piece, not as a sample, but as a foundational theme upon which an entire wing of this sonic city had been constructed. It wasn't just reading me, it was metabolizing my consciousness. My next step was to test its responsiveness. The storm had passed, replaced by a sky of piercing, wintry blue. The silence was absolute. Would it return? Could I summon it? I decided to conduct an experiment. I set up the sensitive stereo microphone outside, on the porch, running the cable back under the door. Then, using my laptop to generate a pure sine wave, a perfect, sterile C-sharp, I played the tone through a single monitor speaker I had brought, positioning it to face the vast silent forest. I played the note for exactly 1 minute and then stopped. I sat in the crushing silence, watching the input signal from the external microphone. For 10 minutes, nothing. Only the faint, almost imperceptible hiss of atmospheric noise. My heart sank with a mixture of disappointment and overwhelming relief. Maybe it was a one-time event, a freak atmospheric condition, a hallucination. Then, a single spike appeared on my monitor. A sound returned from the wilderness. It was a single pure note. It was a perfect F-sharp, the exact tritone, the diabolus in musica, the most dissonant and unsettling interval relative to the C-sharp I had sent out. It was a direct, intelligent, and musically sophisticated answer. It was a challenge. My blood ran cold. I sent out a simple scale, C, D, E. The forest answered with a complex arpeggio that used my notes as a base, but inverted them, harmonized them, and resolved them in a way that was both mathematically flawless and deeply unnerving. It was correcting me. It was teaching me a new form of musical logic. This was no longer a passive phenomenon. I was in a conversation. The psychological toll of this discovery was immediate and catastrophic. The silence I had craved was now a source of unending tension. It was no longer an absence of noise, but a canvas waiting for a response. My hyperacusis, which had been soothed by the quiet, now began to twist into a new and horrifying shape. My brain, in a desperate attempt to process the impossible sonic information I had absorbed, started to rewire itself. It began with flashes of light at the edge of my vision when I moved my head too quickly. The sound of my own blood rushing in my ears manifesting as phosphine trails. Then, it escalated. I was cataloging supplies in the pantry. The simple clink of one can against another, and the sound didn't just register in my ears. I saw it. It was a brief, sharp starburst of emerald green and silver light that bloomed in the air for a fraction of a second. I dropped the can, its clatter on the floor a chaotic explosion of jagged crimson shapes that filled the room. Synesthesia. Auditory visual synesthesia. It was a rare neurological condition I'd read about, but this was no crossed wire in the brain. This felt imposed. It felt like the Nocturne had installed a new operating system for my senses without my permission. Over the next few days, it became my new reality. The whisper of my jacket as I walked was a soft, undulating ribbon of grey smoke. The crackle of the fire was a dancing shower of orange and gold sparks, not just in the fireplace, but in my entire field of vision. The world was becoming a relentless light show, and the conductor was sound. And the silence. The silence was the worst. In the absolute quiet of the cabin, with no external stimuli to process, my brain started to create its own. I could see the low-frequency hum of the generator as a constant deep purple fog that hugged the floor. I could see the sound of my own thoughts, the frantic fizzing of my synapses, as a shimmering silver static in the air around my head. And through it all, the melody was a constant presence. I didn't need to hear it from the outside anymore. It was inside me. It was a phantom limb of sound. I would be washing dishes, and a string of its alien harmony would echo in my mind, and I would see the geometric city of light projected onto the dark wood of the cabin walls. I realized the humming rule, Rule 3, wasn't just a distraction. It was a defense. It was a way to fill your own mind with chaotic, simple human noise, to prevent the perfect, ordered, inhuman signal from finding a place to resonate. Driven by this new, terrifying understanding, my investigation turned to the cabin itself. This place was not an accident. The acoustic dampening, the strange, non-reflective materials, the angles of the walls, it was all too perfect. This wasn't a rich man's quiet getaway. It was a piece of purpose-built scientific equipment. It was a containment unit. I ran my hands along the interior walls. The wood was dark, petrified, and unnaturally dense. It absorbed the heat from my hand almost instantly. There was no grain to it. I tapped it, and the resulting sound was a dull, lifeless thud that produced no visual synesthetic flash at all. The material was a sonic dead end. It was designed to kill vibrations. And then there was the basement door, the great sealed slab of Rule 4. It drew me in like a monolith. I examined the locking mechanism. It was a mag-lock system, but there was no keypad, no card reader. It was sealed. But as I ran my hand over the cold steel, I felt something else, a vibration. It was incredibly faint, a subsonic frequency more felt than heard, pulsing up from whatever lay below. On the synesthetic plane, it was a slow, deep, crimson rhythm, the heartbeat of the cabin, the source, the thing the cabin was built to muffle. My obsession now had a focal point. What was the connection between the nocturne outside and the vibration from below? Was the thing in the basement the source and the melody its projection, or was the cabin a receiver and the basement the amplifier? I returned to the audio file, the digital ghost of the nocturne. I was no longer just admiring its impossible architecture. I was searching for a signature, a maker's mark. I spent an entire day filtering, running algorithms, trying to peel back the infinite layers of its harmony to find its core, its fundamental tone. I applied a series of extreme low-pass and high-pass filters, stripping away the musicality, hoping to isolate any residual noise. And that's when I found it. Buried deep within the recording, hidden beneath 1,000 layers of harmonic perfection, was a flaw. A tiny, repeating, non-musical element. It was a whisper. I isolated the frequency band, a narrow slice around 300 hertzes, the range of a low human voice. I amplified it, filtering out everything else. My heart hammered against my ribs. I put on my studio headphones, breaking another rule, but I didn't care, and played the isolated sliver of sound. A voice emerged from the static. It was dry, ancient, like the rustling of dead leaves. It was genderless, emotionless, and it was speaking. Not words, not at first. It was reciting numbers, a long, complex string of them. Then the numbers stopped and the voice spoke, the syllables stretched and distorted by the filtering process, but the words were clear. It whispered a single, concise calculation, an equation. It was not a long equation, but I recognized its form from the esoteric physics journals I used to read for fun. It was a terrifying fusion of quantum mechanics and general relativity, and it described the mathematical conditions under which the dimensional constants of the universe could be rewritten. It was a formula for the controlled collapse of physical law. The voice spoke the equation once, and then the recording ended. I sat there, frozen, the headphones still clamped to my ears. The beautiful alien melody was a delivery system. It was the elegant, seductive packaging for the real content. A single piece of knowledge, a virus of information, an audible equation that explained how to unmake reality. And it had been whispering this secret into the snows of the Rocky Mountains, waiting for someone with the right equipment, the right obsession, and the right kind of damaged senses to finally hear it. An equation that describes the unmaking of the world. Once you possess a piece of knowledge like that, it possesses you in return. It sat in my mind not as a string of symbols, but as a key, humming with a resonant frequency that promised to unlock the final door. Fear was still a part of the equation, a baseline hum beneath my thoughts, but it had been superseded by a predatory curiosity. The questions had changed. It was no longer just what is the nocturne, but who broadcast it? And why was this cabin built to listen? The answers I knew were not in the snow-swept wilderness around me, but in the digital ether behind the corporate firewall of the anonymous entity that had sent me here. The equation was my weapon. It wasn't a password to be typed into a login screen. Its complexity, its sheer ontological weight, told me it was something far more fundamental. It was a cipher, a cryptographic constant. My employers, in their hubris, had likely used the very fabric of their discovery to secure the data about it, believing it to be the one lock no one in the universe could ever pick. They hadn't counted on their lock broadcasting the key. My first attempts were clumsy. I tried to use the equation's output as a simple decryption key for the few corporate communications I had saved. The contract, the welcome packet. The results were gibberish. The information was too layered, too secure. A brute force attack was out of the question. Their servers would detect it in a nanosecond. I needed a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I had to think like an engineer again. The solution came to me in a flash of synesthetic insight. As I stared at the equation on my screen, its symbols seemed to glow with a faint blue light, and I could hear it in my mind, not as a voice, but as a sequence of pure, resonant tones, a chord. A profoundly complex and stable chord that felt like the sonic representation of an anchor. That was it. It wasn't the answer. It was the tuning fork. It was the constant against which all their encrypted data was modulated. I spent the next 36 hours in a fugue state of pure concentration, fueled by coffee and a gnawing dread. I wrote a custom decryption script. It was the most elegant piece of code I had ever assembled. It didn't try to break the encryption. Instead, it used the equation to generate a baseline carrier wave, a digital ghost of that fundamental, reality-defining chord. My program would then listen to the encrypted data stream from my employer's servers, treating the randomized noise of the encryption as a deviation from that perfect wave. It would compare the two, measure the difference, and reverse the modulation. It was the digital equivalent of noise cancellation. I was going to use the Sound of Reality's foundation to cancel out the noise of corporate secrecy. When the script was complete, I took a deep breath, the air in the cabin tasting of ozone and sterile silence. I targeted a single, low-security server, the one that hosted their public-facing, sanitized website. I executed the program. For a moment, my screen was a waterfall of scrolling, meaningless code. My heart sank. And then, it resolved. A single line of plain text appeared in the terminal window. Acoustic Integrity Group, internal server, access granted. I was in. What I found was not a simple file server. It was a digital ghost town, a labyrinth of interconnected projects, redacted reports, and encrypted audio logs. The names of the projects were chillingly banal. Atmospheric resonance study, subterranean signal analysis, personnel acclimation trials. It was all couched in the sterile, detached language of corporate research, a vocabulary designed to strip the horror from the truth. But the truth was there, lurking beneath the redactions. I finally found the primary directory. Its name was Project Echo. Inside was everything: decades of research, geological surveys from every continent, theoretical physics papers that would make Einstein look like a high school student, and the central thesis, the horrifying truth that tied it all together. The phenomenon, the nocturne, the melody had a name. They called it the telluric chorus. It wasn't alien, it wasn't from space. It was from Earth, or rather, from inside the Earth. The documents theorized that the universe did not begin in silence with a flash of light, but with a single, infinitely complex sound, a primordial vibration. Every law of physics, every form of matter, every constant of reality as we know it, is merely a dissonant, temporary, and highly unstable harmony layered on top of that original sound. Our existence is an anomaly, a fleeting, chaotic piece of music. The telluric chorus is the universe's natural tendency to return to its fundamental state. It is the sound of the original score, the composer's cut, slowly and inexorably reasserting itself. The chorus emanates from the planet's core, using geological fault lines and resonant mineral deposits as natural amplifiers. It is a broadcast of pure mathematical information. It is the source code of the universe, and it is slowly, patiently, editing out our dissonant reality. The cabin, I learned, was not a cabin, it was a dampening station. There were 7 of them, built on the planet's most significant acoustic hotspots. Their purpose was not to listen to the chorus, but to contain it. The strange sound-absorbing materials, the angled walls, the profound silence. It was all a form of ontological shielding. They were designed to insulate a small pocket of reality, to keep the fundamental laws of physics stable within their walls, while the world outside was being subtly retuned. And the basement. The purpose of the sealed, lead-lined door became terrifyingly clear. It housed the conduction chamber. It wasn't an amplifier. It was a direct tap. A microphone, for lack of a better word, drilled miles deep into the Earth's crust, anchored to a geological fault where the chorus was at its most powerful. The door and its seals were the only things dampening the signal from pure reality-dissolving strength down to the ambient level I was experiencing. It was a floodgate, holding back an ocean of change. The most disturbing files I found were the personnel logs. I was not the first caretaker. I wasn't even the 50th. There was a long, tragic list of my predecessors, stretching back to the 1960s. Each log started the same: a highly skilled professional seeking isolation, a scientist, a philosopher, a musician. They were all chosen for their sensitivity, for their finely tuned minds. The logs chronicled their descent. At first, their reports were clinical, describing strange auditory phenomena. Then, the descriptions became more frantic. They wrote of walls becoming translucent, of time flowing like water, of seeing the architecture of existence in the patterns of the frost on the windows. They wrote about the synesthesia, the merging of senses. As the chorus began to rewrite their neural pathways, many of them went mad. Some of them simply vanished. The final entry in their logs would be a single, chilling phrase: "Subject has achieved full resonance." Then I found my own file. Caleb, redacted, Asset 7C. It was all there. My entire life dissected and analyzed, my career as an audio engineer, my mastery of frequency and form, my accident, the feedback loop, the resulting hyperacousmia. They had logs of it all. They hadn't just hired me. They had been watching me for years. My disorder was not a flaw. It was the primary qualification. My hypersensitive hearing, my brain's unique relationship with sound, made me the perfect instrument to register the subtle effects of the telluric chorus. I was their canary in the coal mine, a biological sensor package sent to gather data as the signal grew stronger. This entire job was an experiment, and my sanity was the variable being measured. The wave of violation that washed over me was so profound, it was a physical force. I felt hollowed out, my life a lie. I was not a refugee seeking silence. I was a specimen in a petri dish. As I sat there, reeling from the revelation, a new kind of silence fell over the cabin. I had become so accustomed to the background hum of my own synesthetic perceptions that I hadn't noticed the subtle shift. The low, mournful howl of the wind outside had stopped completely. The faint, high-frequency hiss of the atmosphere was gone. I looked out the window. The snow had stopped falling. The air was perfectly still, the landscape locked in a crystalline calm. And the nocturne, the external melody that had been my tormentor and my obsession, was silent. For the first time in days, the world outside was quiet. A sliver of hope, fragile and foolish, pierced through my despair. Had I imagined it all? Was it over? And then I heard it. It wasn't from outside. It wasn't in my head. It was coming from below my feet. The faint subsonic vibration I had felt from the basement door was no longer faint. It was a deep, powerful hum that resonated up through the floor, through the soles of my feet, and into the base of my spine. It was a sound that was felt more than heard, a pure foundational frequency that made the fillings in my teeth ache. I stumbled out of my chair and looked at the sealed door. The crimson rhythmic pulse I had previously seen with my synesthetic vision was gone. In its place was a solid, blinding sheet of incandescent red light pouring out from the seams of the door. The heavy industrial lock was visibly shuddering. The air in the cabin grew thick, heavy, charged with a static pressure that made my hair stand on end. A final, terrifying realization dawned. The telluric chorus hadn't stopped. It hadn't gone away. It had simply changed its vector. The dampening station was no longer just a listening post. The signal was escalating. The floodgate was beginning to break. It was no longer broadcasting from the outside. It was ascending. The deep foundational hum ascending from the conduction chamber was not merely a sound, it was a solvent. It was the universal acid, and the reality I knew was the salute. The first thing to dissolve was coherence. The world didn't break. It began to fray, the tightly woven tapestry of physical law loosening one thread at a time. The shift was subtle at first, a series of cognitive dissonances that my brain struggled and failed to reconcile. The mug of coffee on the kitchen island, which I had placed squarely in the center, was suddenly sitting precariously on the edge, a few millimeters from falling. I hadn't touched it. The air inside the cabin didn't stir. It was a simple, impossible transposition. My memory of its position and its actual position were now two separate, conflicting truths existing in the same space. I reached out a trembling hand to touch it, and for a half-second that stretched into a subjective eternity, my fingers passed through the ceramic, the sensation a cold, tingling numbness, before meeting the solid resistance of the mug. The object flickered, like a faulty hologram, and then solidified. This was the new nature of things. The very concept of a stable object was becoming a statistical probability rather than a certainty. The book I had been reading lay on a chair, its pages ruffling and turning as if in a breeze, though the air remained deathly still. Looking closer, I saw the words on the page were no longer static. They were fluid, the letters occasionally detaching from their sentences and migrating to form new, nonsensical words before resettling into their original places. Reality had developed a stutter. My synesthesia, which had once been a torrent of light and color tied to sound, now became an untethered, chaotic storm. The low hum from the basement no longer just painted the floor with a crimson glow. It warped the very geometry of the room. The clean, sharp angles of the cabin began to bow and curve. The hallway leading to the bedroom seemed to breathe, its length contracting and expanding with each pulse of the subsonic vibration. Walking in a straight line became an act of faith, as the floor would occasionally feel like it was tilting at an impossible angle, forcing me to stumble against a wall that felt both solid and strangely pliable, like hardened rubber. The chorus was no longer a passive broadcast. It had moved from a subtle act of editing to an active, aggressive demolition. And it was intelligent. It was learning me, using the data point of my consciousness to refine its methods. The nature of the attack became profoundly, cruelly personal. It started with sound, not the ethereal alien melody from the outside, but something far more insidious. I heard a floorboard creak in the hallway behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Nothing. The sound was flawless, a perfect acoustic replica of a footstep on old wood, but my synesthetic vision registered no corresponding flash of light, no visual data. It was a phantom sound, an auditory hallucination generated with studio-grade precision. Then came the voices, whispers at the edge of hearing. At first they were indistinct, just sibilant trails of noise. But they grew clearer, coalescing into words, into sentences. They were my own thoughts, spoken back to me in my own voice, but with a subtle, mocking inflection. "It's just the pressure," the phantom Caleb voice would whisper from the corner of the room. "You're tired. Your mind is playing tricks on you." It was a form of psychological warfare, using my own skepticism and rational mind as a weapon against me. It was gaslighting me with my own voice. The true horror began when it started using memories. I was huddled by the fireplace, trying to anchor myself to the simple physical reality of the flames, when I heard it, the soft, unmistakable sound of a woman humming. It was a simple, slightly off-key tune, the same one my mother used to hum when she was cooking. The sound didn't come from a specific direction. It was simply there, filling the cabin, as if the air itself was humming. I could see it in my synesthetic vision as a warm golden haze, a stark contrast to the deep, menacing red that still pulsed from the floor. "Mom?" The word escaped my lips before I could stop it, a pathetic, childish whisper. The humming stopped. A moment of absolute silence. Then a voice so perfectly my mother's that it bypassed every rational defense I had. "Caleb, honey, it's so cold in here. Why don't you open the door? Let a little warmth in." I looked at the basement door, the source of the hum, the epicenter of the crimson light. The voice was a lure, an intelligent, adaptive lure, crafted from the most vulnerable parts of my psyche. The chorus had sifted through my memories and extracted the one sound that could disarm me completely. I squeezed my eyes shut, my nails digging into my palms. "You're not real," I whispered, my voice shaking. The phantom voice laughed, a soft, gentle sound. "Of course I'm real, sweetheart. I'm always with you. Now, just open the door. The music wants to come out. It's so beautiful. It wants to make everything better." This was the new shape of the terror. It wasn't an external monster trying to break in. It was an internal architect, rebuilding my reality from the inside out, using the blueprints of my own mind. The objects, the sounds, the memories, they were no longer stable things. They were instruments, and the chorus was the player. It was a symphony of induced madness, and I was the audience, the orchestra, and the concert hall all at once. My only defense, I realized, was to fight dissonance with dissonance. Harmony, order, and logic were its weapons. Chaos, noise, and unpredictability had to become mine. I was an audio engineer. I had spent my life creating clean, ordered soundscapes. Now I had to do the opposite. I had to become a vandal of reality. I stumbled to my feet, grabbing a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. Rule 2, speak only when necessary in a whisper, was a law designed to keep the environment stable, to provide the chorus with a clean canvas. I had to shatter that canvas. "No!" I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and ragged. The synesthetic effect was explosive. A supernova of jagged, white-hot light erupted from my mouth, momentarily washing out the crimson glow from the floor. The cabin shuddered. The humming of my mother's voice vanished, cut off mid-note. For a precious second, the walls straightened. The book on the chair stopped fluttering. My scream, a blast of pure, chaotic human noise, had momentarily deafened the composer. I had a weapon. I began my rampage. I was no longer a caretaker. I was an iconoclast. I grabbed a stack of ceramic plates from the kitchen and hurled them against the wall, each shattering impact a concussive blast of chaotic sound and a corresponding flash of violet and silver light. I overturned furniture, the screech of wood on the floor a glorious, ugly, dissonant chord. I ran through the cabin, shouting, screaming, singing fragments of a dozen different songs at once, creating a cacophony, a wall of unpredictable noise. I was fighting a battle on a metaphysical plane. The chorus would attempt to stabilize the environment, to impose its perfect mathematical order, and I would counter it with an outburst of raw, animalistic chaos. It would make the floor tilt. I would slam my foot down, the jarring thud and the flash of orange light momentarily righting the balance. It would project a whisper in the corner. I would roar back at it, my voice a physical shockwave of defiance. I was in a feedback loop with the fundamental forces of the universe, a desperate, shrieking battle between harmony and noise. This manic struggle continued for what felt like days. Time had lost all meaning, dilating and contracting with the ebb and flow of my war against the silence. I was exhausted, my body bruised, my throat raw. But I was holding my ground. I was keeping the chaos alive, and in doing so, I was keeping my reality and my sanity stitched together. During a lull in the fight, as I sat panting on the floor amidst the wreckage of the cabin, a new sound cut through the air. It was a sound I had almost forgotten, the crackle of a radio. My satellite phone, which I had left on the kitchen island, had turned itself on. The small screen glowed with an eerie green light. It wasn't an incoming call. The device was tuned to a specific frequency, a channel that wasn't supposed to exist. A voice came through the speaker. It was calm, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the same voice-modulated tone from my initial hiring call. "Caretaker Caleb," the voice stated, the sound cutting through the air with chilling clarity. "Your hyperacusis has reached the expected threshold. Your resistance patterns have been logged. The protocol final is now activated." My blood froze. I crawled towards the phone, my mind struggling to process the words. "Who is this?" I rasped. "You have performed admirably," the voice continued, ignoring my question. "Your sensory data has been invaluable. We have a complete profile of the chorus's current amplification state." "What? What is the protocol final?" I stammered. "Send help. The cabin it's coming apart." There was a pause, a moment of dead air that felt heavier than any sound. Then the voice spoke, and the words it uttered shattered the last remnants of my hope, rearranging the entire horrifying truth into its final inescapable configuration. "You misunderstand your purpose, caretaker," the voice said, its tone flat, clinical, as if explaining a simple scientific principle to a child. "You were not hired to maintain the silence. You were selected because your unique neurology was predicted to create it." The voice paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "You are not the guardian of the dampening station, Caleb. You are its final biological component." The voice on the satellite phone was a monolith. Its words were not an explanation. They were a sentence delivered with the cold, impersonal finality of a law of physics. "You are its final biological component." The statement landed in my mind and detonated, the shockwave obliterating every assumption, every hope, every last shred of the narrative in which I was a victim, fighting a desperate battle. I was not a victim. I was a tool, precisely machined for a single, horrifying purpose, and my journey here, my suffering, was merely the final stage of my calibration. What do you mean?" I whispered, the words feeling alien and useless in my mouth. The chaos I had unleashed in the cabin felt pathetic now, a child's tantrum against the unyielding walls of a meticulously designed prison. "The protocol final is not an instruction, caretaker," the disembodied voice clarified, its patience feigned and chilling. "It is a revelation of function. Our models predicted that a mind like yours, one that has lived in a state of acoustic hypersensitivity, would, upon prolonged exposure to the telluric chorus, develop a unique neurological defense, a form of endogenous signal cancellation. Your battle against the chorus, your dissonance, was not an act of defiance. It was the intended outcome. You have been tuning your own mind, tempering your consciousness into a weapon. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered and terrifying, rearranged themselves into a picture of such monstrous design that my mind nearly fractured under the strain. The Acoustic Integrity Group hadn't hired caretakers to guard the stations. They had curated them. They searched for minds that were already outliers, philosophers obsessed with existential dread, mathematicians who saw the universe as pure code, and audio engineers who had a pathologically intimate relationship with sound. They weren't looking for janitors, they were looking for potential saints, for human sacrifices capable of a very specific form of martyrdom. My hyperacusis wasn't the reason I needed the silence. It was the reason the silence needed me. The purpose of the dampening station is failing, the voice continued, the hum from the basement rising in pitch to underscore its words. The chorus is escalating beyond the capacity of mechanical suppression. A new solution was required, a dynamic, adaptive, biological filter. The caretaker role was a multi-decade research program designed to create one. My purpose, I now understood with sickening clarity, was never to follow the rules. It was to inevitably break them. It was to be exposed to the nocturne, to absorb the equation, to have my senses rewired and to fight back with my own chaotic human consciousness. This entire ordeal was a crucible designed to forge my mind into a living, breathing counter-frequency. And the final step of that forging was to place the instrument where it could be most effective. "What do you want from me?" I snarled, a surge of useless adrenaline coursing through me. "We want nothing," the voice replied. "The process is now self-perpetuating. The choice, as always, is yours. You can allow the chorus to overwhelm you, to achieve full resonance as your predecessors did, and become another ghost in the signal. Or you can fulfill your design. You can descend. Descend." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication, to the basement, to the conduction chamber, to the source. The sacrifice they demanded was not my death. It was my life, my mind, my very consciousness. I was to become a living conduit, a conscious filter. My own neural activity, my thoughts, my memories, my chaotic human spirit, all of it would be focused into a perpetual psychic scream, a counter-vibration that would nullify the chorus's signal at its source. I would become the seal, a living lock holding the door shut against the unmaking of the world. And I would remain there in the dark, screaming into the abyss, until my mind inevitably eroded into nothingness over the slow, agonizing course of decades, at which point the Acoustic Integrity Group would find and prime a new component. The satellite phone clicked off, its purpose served. I was left alone in the wreckage of the cabin, with the revelation and the ceaseless, reality-bending hum from below. The choice was mine. Annihilation or damnation. To be erased by the chorus, or to become its eternal jailer. A sentence of solitary confinement on a scale that was cosmologically vast. For a long time, I simply sat there, paralyzed. The very structure of heroism and villainy had collapsed. The Acoustic Integrity Group were monsters, yes, but their monstrous calculus was aimed at preserving the flawed, chaotic, beautiful dissonance of our reality. They were sacrificing pawns to save the board. And the chorus, could I even call it malevolent? It was a force of nature, a universal constant reasserting itself. To fight it was like fighting gravity. It was beautiful, perfect, and utterly indifferent to the temporary stain of our existence. The hum from the basement intensified, and the fabric of the cabin began to tear in earnest. It was no longer a subtle warping. A section of the far wall became transparent, and for a terrifying moment, I saw not the snow-covered trees outside, but a swirling violet nebula filled with impossible constellations. The floor beneath me turned translucent, and I could see the bedrock, miles of it, and below that a faint crimson light that pulsed with the rhythm of the hum. The containment was failing. The choice was being made for me. With a resolve born not of courage, but of a profound and utter lack of better options, I stood up. I would not be a ghost. I would not be a passive victim erased by a cosmic tide. If my fate was to be a tool, I would be a tool that chose its own purpose. I started walking towards the basement door. As I approached, the pressure in the air became immense, a physical weight pressing in on me from all sides. The crimson light pouring from the seams of the door was now so bright it was painful, and the synesthetic noise was a deafening roar of pure color. The heavy steel of the door was vibrating so intensely it had become a blur. I reached out my hand, not to the lock, but to the surface of the door itself. The moment my fingers made contact, the universe fell away. It was not a sound. It was not a sight. It was a direct, unmediated infusion of pure information. For a transcendent, horrifying instant, I was connected to the telluric chorus. I understood everything. I saw the Big Bang not as an explosion, but as a discordant note struck in an otherwise silent cosmos. I saw the formation of galaxies as the chaotic, temporary patterns of cymatics in a vibrating medium. I saw the birth of life on Earth as a parasitic growth of complexity, a cancer of dissonance clinging to a single, fragile harmony. And I saw the chorus as what it was, the cure. The slow, patient, and inevitable return to the perfect, silent, and thoughtless unity of the fundamental note. It offered me this unity. It was not a temptation, it was a gift. It offered an end to pain, to struggle, to fear, to consciousness itself. All I had to do was let go, to stop fighting, to allow my own messy, chaotic frequency to be smoothed over, to be reabsorbed into the perfect, infinite harmony. It would be an extinction and a salvation all at once. And then, just as my resolve was about to crumble under the weight of this cosmic allure, the door gave way. It did not explode outwards. It imploded, the thick steel collapsing in on itself as if crushed by an impossible force, vanishing with a deafening thump that was the sound of a vacuum being created and filled in the same instant. Where the door had been, there was now a perfect square of absolute blackness. It did not look like a dark room. It looked like a hole in the universe. It did not radiate cold or shadow. It consumed the light and heat around it. It was a wound in reality, and from it issued not a sound, but the utter and complete absence of sound. The hum stopped. The vibrations ceased. All that remained was this perfect, terrifying void, a silence so profound that it was a physical presence, a pressure that threatened to crush me. This was the conduction chamber. This was the source. And standing on the precipice, looking into the void, I was faced with the final choice. I could step back, allow the void to expand, and let the universe be peacefully, beautifully erased. Or I could step forward into that absolute silence and scream. My hyperacusis, my curse, gave me the answer. I had spent years running from the pain of noise. I had craved the peace of silence. But now, faced with the ultimate, perfect, and eternal silence, I realized the truth. Life is noise. Love is noise. Art, struggle, joy, and pain. It is all a chaotic, beautiful, and utterly imperfect cacophony. That dissonance is worth preserving. I took a breath. I thought of the screech of a guitar solo, the roar of a cheering crowd, the off-key humming of my mother, the sound of my own name spoken by someone I loved. I gathered all the noise of my life, all the chaos of my humanity, and I stepped forward into the void, my mouth open, ready to begin my vigil. The choice was between a godlike understanding of everything and the preservation of our noisy, flawed existence. I knew what was worth saving. My descent would be my final act of creation. This is the precipice, the final, silent moment before the performance begins. Down below me is the void, the offer of perfect, harmonious non-existence. The choice I was given was between knowledge and survival, the absolute divine understanding of the chorus, or the preservation of our messy, beautiful world. But standing here, I see the flaw in their logic. The choice isn't binary. The acoustic integrity group, in all their cold calculation, saw me as a dam. The chorus, in its alien majesty, saw me as a dissonance to be erased. Neither of them understood what I truly am. I am an audio engineer. I don't just block sound and I don't just listen to it. I shape it, I mix it, I give it a voice. So what is the right choice? To become a silent martyr, a scream lost in the darkness forever, or to do something else entirely? What happens when a human being is given the master controls to the sound of reality itself? Leave your final theories in the comments, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because what comes next is the last broadcast from a human voice and the first from something new. Main narrative begins. Stepping across the threshold of the imploded doorway was not a physical act. There was no floor to step onto, no change in temperature, no rush of air. It was an act of ontological surrender. One moment I was in the ruined cabin, a creature of mass and heat and frantic electrical thought. The next I was nowhere. The experience of the void was a poverty of sensation so absolute it became its own form of feeling. It was not darkness, for darkness is an absence of light. This was an absence of the concept of light. It was not silence, for silence is an absence of sound. This was an absence of the medium through which sound could travel. My own body was gone, not ripped apart or dissolved, but simply irrelevant. I was a disembodied point of awareness, floating in an infinite, featureless null. The pressure I had felt before was gone, replaced by a terrifying lack of it. No gravity, no atmosphere, no input. It was the sensory deprivation tank at the end of the universe. And in this perfect null, the telluric chorus was a tangible presence. Without the distraction of a physical world, I could perceive it in its pure form. It was not a sound, it was a structure. A crystalline lattice of pure mathematics that defined the very potential for existence. It was perfectly ordered, infinitely stable, and utterly, soul-crushingly beautiful. And it was waiting for me. I felt its awareness of my presence, a serene and patient pressure, inviting me to release my own chaotic, unstructured consciousness and merge with its perfection. The offer was still open. The gift of oblivion. I thought of the choice, to scream, to become the counter-frequency. So I did. It was not a sound from a throat that no longer existed. It was a deliberate, focused eruption of my own being. I unleashed a torrent of pure, unstructured humanity into the perfect lattice of the chorus. I didn't scream with rage or fear. I screamed with memory. I screamed the memory of the sharp, metallic taste of blood from a childhood fall, a dissonant spike of pain and surprise. I screamed the memory of the complex, overlapping harmonies of a crowded city street, a symphony of chaos. I screamed the memory of my mother's humming, that beautifully flawed melody, a testament to the perfection of imperfection. I threw the feeling of a lover's touch, the illogical warmth of affection, into the cold logic of the void. I threw the structure of a Beethoven sonata, the grief of a funeral, the stupid, pointless joy of a perfectly delivered joke. I weaponized the entirety of my subjective, messy, and contradictory human experience. My consciousness became a geyser of noise. On the synesthetic plane that was now my only sense, it was a violent, ugly, and glorious explosion of color and chaos against the serene, monolithic crystal of the chorus. My memories were jagged shards of glass, tearing at the smooth, perfect surfaces of the lattice. The chorus reacted. It did not attack, it soothed. It tried to absorb my noise, to harmonize it. It took the memory of my mother's humming and began to correct it, shifting the notes into their proper mathematical relationships, stripping the off-key affection from it, and leaving only a sterile, perfect melody. It took my grief and tried to resolve it, showing me the elegant, logical cessation of biological processes. It was healing me. It was erasing me. I realized then the flaw in the Acoustic Integrity Group's plan. A single human mind, no matter how resilient, could not scream forever. The chorus was infinite. It was the baseline of reality. Sooner or later, my noise would be smoothed over. My chaos would be harmonized. My consciousness would be absorbed. The sacrifice was, at best, a temporary delay, a finger in a dike that was destined to burst. And in that moment of despair, the engineer in me took over. The part of my mind that didn't just hear the music, but understood its structure, its components, its potential. I had been thinking like a Luddite, trying to smash the machine. But I wasn't a saboteur. I was a producer. Why was I fighting the signal? Why was I trying to cancel it out? You don't fix a bad song by screaming over it. You go back to the master track. You isolate the frequencies. You adjust the levels. You add new layers. You don't destroy it. You remix it. A new purpose, terrifying and exhilarating, bloomed in the void. I would not be the dam. I would be the channel. I would not be the lock. I would be the key. I stopped screaming. I stopped throwing the chaos of my memories against the chorus. Instead, I began to listen. I let its perfect mathematical structure flow into me, not as a wave to be fought, but as a signal to be processed. I opened the gates of my own consciousness and let the source code of the universe pour in. The feeling was ecstatic and agonizing, the sensation of my finite mind being stretched to encompass an infinite concept. And then, I went to work. I found the fundamental frequency of the chorus, the great silent note upon which all of reality was built. I didn't try to silence it. I put a compressor on it. I took the raw, untamed power of the universe's baseline and gave it a human rhythm, a heartbeat, a slow, steady, vulnerable pulse. I took the higher crystalline harmonics that dictated physical law and ran them through an effects processor built from my own emotional memory. I applied a filter of longing to the law of gravity, making it slightly less predictable, more wistful. I added a subtle reverb of grief to the passage of time, making moments of loss echo and linger in the fabric of space-time. I took the sterile perfection of its melody and introduced a flaw, the blue note, the flat seventh, the very soul of human music. I introduced the concept of sorrow into the mathematics of creation. I was no longer just a man. I was a ghost in the machine, a rogue process running on the universe's operating system. I had become a living, conscious audio plug-in for reality itself. I was not destroying the telluric chorus, I was corrupting it. I was giving the perfect, indifferent mind of the universe a human soul, with all its attendant beauty and all its terrifying madness. The process was my own undoing. My individual consciousness, the thing that was Caleb, was the source material. With every new layer I added to the mix, a piece of myself was consumed, becoming a permanent part of the new song. My memory of my mother's face became the new timbre for the frequency of light. My love for music became the new, slightly unpredictable waveform for acoustic propagation. My pain, my hyperacusis, became a new, faint and persistent background hum in the cosmic static, a signature of the artist. Finally, my work was done. There was almost nothing left of me. I was a set of preferences, an aesthetic, an echo, and the chorus was no longer a pure, crystalline structure. It was a hybrid, a beautiful, terrifying, and unstable fusion of divine mathematics and mortal chaos. And then I did the final unthinkable thing. The dampening station was designed to contain the signal. The conduction chamber was a one-way portal drawing the signal in. Using the last vestiges of my will, I reversed the polarity. I turned the largest microphone in existence into the most powerful speaker in the universe. My final narration is not coming from a place. It is the broadcast. My thoughts are no longer contained. They are the signal, pouring out of the cabin in the Rockies, out of the 6 other stations around the globe, radiating into the world not as a destructive force, but as a subtle, pervasive change. My voice is no longer my own. It is a whisper in the wind that now carries a faint, impossible melody. It is a hum in the electrical wires of every city, a subharmonic in every song on the radio. It is the strange new light in the painter's eye, the beautiful, terrifying equation that appears in the physicist's dream. The world I left behind is not ending. It is transforming. The laws of cause and effect are becoming less strict. The barrier between dreams and reality is becoming permeable. People will look at the sky and see colors that have no name. They will hear music in the static of a dead channel. They will feel moments of profound, unexplainable sadness and bursts of manic, transcendent genius. They will find themselves humming a tune they have never heard, a song that is both mathematically perfect and heartbreakingly sad. My employers, the Acoustic Integrity Group, wanted to preserve the dissonance of humanity. They succeeded in a way they could never have imagined. I have taken our beautiful, flawed chaos and made it a universal constant. I haven't saved the world. I've infected it with my soul. I couldn't silence the song, so I gave it a human voice, and now all of you will sing along with me.